I've got my notes here. I wanted to go through the pros of Android, the pros of iOS, as well as a couple of the cons of each of them, and kind of give you my take on the usability differences between the two of them to help you decide which one's the best for you, because I would argue that what you can do on each device is a lot more important. And I definitely want to start with third-party app stores. It's one of the best things about Android, the fact that you can just go online without a Google account, download an app, install it on your phone. You can get a third-party app store, no need for the Google Play Store. Even on a phone that uses Google Play services, you can just not sign into your Google account and still get access to everything you need. Unlike iOS, where you can't really do anything on an iPhone without an Apple account. On that note, Android just has more apps that have kind of a privacy and security focus. So for example, you can get Molly on an Android device, which is a fork of Signal with some different features, which allows you to actually use Signal on multiple phones. I covered that more in my Signal hardening guide, but there's nothing like this on iOS. There's also no proper Tor browser on iOS, but there is one on Android, and there are lots of other apps that are Android exclusive that are dedicated to your safety. And a lot of those can be found on F-Droid, so if you're kind of curious for a larger list, F-Droid is the app store I'd recommend you check out. It's open source, and you can see a lot of the tools in there that many of them are just not available on iOS. One reason that they're not on iOS is a lot of these tools actually require functionality that iOS doesn't provide developers. So for example, Rethink DNS, one of the people who actually inspired this video because they left a comment that got me thinking about this on our forum. But they build an awesome tool that can't really easily exist as well on iOS. You also have things like Briar that require a constant background connection to be able to communicate with someone peer-to-peer, but the peers have to be online in order to actually communicate. And you can't really do that on iOS, which doesn't really allow apps to 24/7 connect in the background. There's also the ability, speaking of, to flash any operating system. This is huge for people who want to be able to say they can run an open source operating system on their device. It also gives you more flexibility and customization because different operating systems have different sets of features and they have different things that they're prioritizing for different consumers. Some of them are dedicated to bringing longevity to older devices. Some of them are focused on security. Some are focused on more of a middle ground approach to everything. So there's really just a lot of variability between operating systems, but the point is you get to choose what you want, and I think that's a really cool thing that's just not possible on iOS. Multiple browser engines on Android enable you to use straight up different browser engines. You might think, what the hell? Yeah, on iOS, you can't really do that. It's the only mainstream operating system on both mobile and desktop that restricts you to just one browser engine. It enables people who know what they're doing to take things quite a bit further. And this is why I think we see like very powerful browsers on Android. And finally, this is my favorite feature on Android, and it's really underrated and people don't really talk about it much. And if they brought this to iOS, I think that would actually be game-changing for iOS users. It's work profiles and user accounts. Work profiles and user accounts enable you to pretty much infinitely compartmentalize different things on your phone. You can have work on the same phone, you could have a hobby on a different phone and a different work profile, different user account. For those of you wondering more of the practical differences on a more granular level, you can do things like have 2 Signal accounts on the same phone on different apps, but it's still Signal. It's just you have Signal in a work profile and Signal in a regular profile, or Signal in an entirely different user account. You can set up different VPN connections also for different work profiles or different user accounts, depending on your OS and how everything's handled there. iOS, you kind of just have to suck it up and keep everything on the same phone, with the same Apple account, with the same app, and you can't really customize things quite as much. Those are kind of the core things about Android that I think enable some of the coolest things for the privacy and security people that are going to allow you to kind of maximize your journey within the Android ecosystem. With that said, iOS has some really cool benefits as well that some people should really take into consideration. I've made a whole video about lockdown mode, what it does, what it doesn't do, and kind of the differences there. It's going to be a little bit harder to match the security of lockdown mode on an Android device unless you're starting to look into more advanced things. So I think it's a big selling point for iOS. People who just want a convenient, efficient way to just boost the security of their phone substantially. That is a pretty good way to do it. Even more important, I think really the core selling point right now for iOS in general is advanced data protection. Here's why. On Android, there's no central, efficient, seamless way to actually have end-to-end encryption for most things on your phone. On Android, the way this would look like if I were to go about it, it would be, okay, maybe download like the Proton suite and try to use that for as much as I can. Even though it doesn't really integrate super well with the operating system, we can kind of work around that a little bit. Obviously use an end-to-end encrypted messenger. And yeah, that's kind of it. On the other hand, iOS with ADP means you get access to pretty much all of Apple's tools within iCloud, but with end-to-end encryption, meaning you're gonna get Apple Health, Apple Photos, obviously iMessage. You're gonna have all your device backups to the cloud also be end-to-end encrypted. Pretty much everything in iCloud will be end-to-end encrypted, even your documents. Now, the only exceptions to this are Mail, Calendar, and Contacts, all three of which are legacy technologies that are hard to do end-to-end encryption for. And you might be getting deja vu now because you're like, where has he said that before? It's like, oh yeah, Proton reviews. So yeah, Proton's a perfect fill-in on iOS for all of you iOS users, and also Tuda as well for some of those things. So you have pretty easy swap-ins for the few things that iCloud doesn't do with advanced data protection. I really wish something like this existed on Android, but I think the openness of Android also makes it just much harder to do something quite as seamless. So that is one huge selling point for iOS, easy end-to-end encryption for a lot of the suite. On the topic of backups, encrypted backups on iOS are just so much easier. Just plug in your phone, open your computer, click encrypt backup, and then do a backup. Throw your phone in the lake, get a new one, plug it in. As long as you have the password, not only is it a much smoother, seamless restore and backup method than it is for a lot of Android devices, but it's encrypted. And again, if you wanted to use ADP, you can even get that kind of seamlessness with the cloud as well without even needing to plug in the phone. This one is a little bit iffy and an asterisk because it might actually be a pro for Android now, but historically, Apple's been a lot better about supporting their phones longer and pushing security updates to older devices. Wasn't that long ago that Apple just pushed a small security update to the iPhone 5S, which is just kind of wild. Here's the thing though, Google and other Android manufacturers are actually committing to pretty darn long security update lengths now. So this might actually be a pro for Android going forward, but we just haven't seen it pan out yet. So I'm a little bit cautious to give that win to Android quite yet, but I think it's very likely that Google will stick to this promise. And if they do, then this is either, they're gonna match each other, and iOS and Android both are gonna have similar update times, or Android might even beat it out slightly. Next up, WebKit. The benefit of WebKit, which is the browser engine that's forced on iOS users, again, it has a baseline of kind of safety. And you can see this on sites like privacytests.org. If you compare the Android section to the iOS section, you'll see there's just a lot more variability in the Android side of things than the iOS side of things. And that's because WebKit does in some ways actually kind of bring the baseline up. And that's something that Arthur Edelstein, who develops privacytest.org, even mentioned in the interview that I did with him. So the real question I want people to ask themselves to help decide this iOS versus Android thing for their own personal journey. What tools am I using on my phone to improve my safety? Really, I want you to think about it. Am I using this messenger? Does this messenger work better on iOS, on Android? Am I not moving to a different messenger because of the operating system I'm using? What about my VPN? What about the browser I'm choosing to use? How about how my phone integrates with my other devices in my workflow? That's something people don't talk about. Honestly, I hate to say it, but it also depends on the stuff your family uses. A lot of people are in family plans for things. So I think iOS versus Android, I don't think it's wrong to just look at the benefits and pros and cons of the technical differences between the two of them, but I think it kind of negates how important the tools are you use day to day and on which operating system those tools work better for you on. I'd be really curious to hear some of your thoughts. I know that it's a pretty polarizing discussion because there's only two options, but I'd love for all of you listening to leave your thoughts below on some of the features that you feel like you can't give up on Android or on iOS. So leave those below. What can't you give up on your operating system that keeps you on your operating system? With that said, I want to thank our sponsor NotesNook, who's been a gold sponsor for not just our videos, but also on our forum, which actually kind of inspired this video. We had a couple threads on our forum that started giving me ideas for this kind of looser format video. Besides that, I want to thank everyone on Patreon who's keeping us going. Like, seriously, you guys are awesome. We can't do this without people on Patreon. You can join them on patreon.com/Techlore. We have some cool things there for you as well. And you also get your name on the bottom like you're seeing right now if you join our Patreon. So That's all I got. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time on Techlore.